Well, I think first we need to begin with clarity about what we mean by relational ministry and what kind of relationships. And one way to think about that theologically is that we are actually looking to participate in God's shalom, which often is thought of as peace, but it's much more than just peace. It's wholeness that extends really through all creation, includes humanity and all creation. And it involves qualities like care and respect and dignity and honor and justice and reconciliation. So this notion of shalom is really a big picture that points to the wholeness and flourishing of all that God has created. So then the question is, for me, how can IPNB, interpersonal neurobiology, contribute to us living in shalom as we minister to both youth and young adults? And one of the things that I would say is that IPNB challenges our theology just as our theology can challenge IPNB and create a bigger sense of what life together in shalom looks like. So real briefly, interpersonal neurobiology helps us to live as integrated people, differentiated but linked, in both intimacy and integrity. And usually theologically, when we talk about this, we talk about it in the human divine realm and the human to human realm, but we forget all of the realms that exist within a person. So if we deal with a transpersonal dimension, an interpersonal dimension, we tend to forget an intrapersonal dimension. And in interpersonal biology, interpersonal neurobiology, there are 9 domains of integration. And 7 of these domains have to do with the person as an embodied whole person. Now that comes out of relationship, those 7 domains of integration. But things like integrating our consciousness, our memory, the right and left hemispheres of our brain, the old reptilian brain and the more advanced thinking brain, integration of how we understand time, past and present. So there are these 9 domains of integration. And I think what IPNB helps us to do in ministry is to notice that when we are not experiencing intimacy and integrity in our relationships with one another or our relationship with God, we actually have to attend to some of these other domains. So I'll just give you one example from one of the domains, the domain of the integration of consciousness. And this has to do with where we place our attention, the capacity to place our attention on multiple aspects of our experience. So if I'm in conflict or distress or confusion or overwhelmed with anxiety, IPNB teaches me in this domain of the integration of consciousness to be able to place my attention not just on the thing that's distressing me or on the conflict or the stuck relationship, but on all of these other aspects of my experience. So to place my attention on that which is good, that which is right, that which is beautiful, that which is true, on the promises of God. And there's a very practical skill called the wheel of awareness that helps us to do that. So as a leader in ministry, there are many times where I get stuck in relationships with others or my relationship with God. And it's this wheel of awareness that teaches me to place my attention on different aspects of my relationship with this person or with this group or with God. And that shifts me out of anxiety, out of reactivity, out of crisis, out of confusion. And that then enables me as a leader to attune to other people, to attach to them in ways that really do enable us together to participate in this thing that we call shalom.
So I think the first thing that faith communities or congregations have to ask themselves is what they actually mean by faith formation. Some faith communities I'm going to use sort of a negative example. Some faith communities really think of faith formation as young people being able to say the same words and do the same actions as all the adults in the room and do it with the same kind of speed or with the same kind of rhythm. And that faith formation then for some of those communities really becomes conforming. And that's not necessarily what faith formation means for me as a theologian. I like to think of faith formation as communities helping people get an imagination about God, so that during their joyful times and in their difficult times in life, during the peaks and the valleys of their lives, that they have an imagination about how God is with them. And that's going to be really different for everybody. That faith formation then doesn't mean that we all get on the same path, but faith formation means that a community can honor and walk with people on their own journeys about as they live their lives and as they struggle to see how God is with them in their lives. And so for me, science, just like I believe in science because I'm willing to go to the doctor when I'm sick, science has told me a lot about my body and the way it works, and neuroscience is telling us more and more about how our brains are connected to our bodies. And so for me, science actually opens up a whole new way for faith communities to think about individuals and how they are journeying through their lives. So I think science can help ministers in faith formation by telling us about how people, for example, experience joy in their bodies or experience fear in their bodies. It can tell us how people are able to develop or not develop when they feel safe or when they don't feel safe. And so I think science just opens up a whole new window and gives ministers a whole bunch of new tools to help Christians have an imagination about who God is. God's not just sort of an intellectual game. God's not a puzzle to be solved. We believe as Lutherans, that I am, that God's a living, incarnated being, and that God shows up in so many different ways. And science can help us see that rather than science being something that is a field that has nothing to do with faith or nothing to do with religion. Science has everything to do with humans and human bodies and human minds, and so does religion. So in that sense, I think science and religion and science and faith communities can work together to help people really develop their faith.